why would anyone want my data? Why would anyone want to attack me? And I talk a lot of times about one of the things that makes OT cybersecurity, I guess, such a big issue is there's three assumptions or fallacies in cybersecurity, and the very first one is what you just hit on. I think people underestimate how important their data or processes would be in a bad actor's hands. That data could be your personnel records, right? It could just be information about your employees, information about your customers, right? Whether that's to blackmail you or to pose as you to try to trick somebody into issuing an invoice to them or a purchase order to them, that data is really valuable. On the other end of the spectrum, when we deal with life sciences companies or companies that have intellectual property, obviously that data is huge, right? Some of these life sciences, these pharmaceutical companies, they have patented intellectual property that's worth literal billions to them.
Right.
And if somebody got their hands on that, whether it's the recipe to make that, or even just the information about what ingredients are in a drug or in a particular formulation, and they dump that on the public internet, that patent is essentially worthless at that point in time. So people seriously underestimate the value that their information has to an outsider.
Hey, I'm Nate Wheeler. I am the host of Manufacturing Insiders Podcast. Really want to thank you for joining today. I hope that you learned some really great insights from this manufacturing leader that you're about to hear from. I also hope that you'll go ahead and hit that like button on the video and subscribe to our channel so you can see more of the stuff that comes out as we're continuing to publish content. Every like, every subscribe really helps us get this message out. And the message that we're sharing is really just a message of hope for manufacturers. I understand, I work with you guys every day. I understand how many different obstacles are in your faces, from technology to government regulations to competition from foreign and domestic markets. And I really want to share strategies with you on how to deal with these issues. And I think there's no better way to learn than hearing directly from somebody that solves some of these challenges. Thanks for watching today, and look forward to seeing you soon. So let's take kind of a traditional job shop that's I really like to kind of start with, because AI, automation, all these topics are really hot topics in the manufacturing space. A lot of guys out there kind of trying to sort through where do I need to look first? And what I always say, I'm not the expert, but this is from experts I've talked to, is data collection is the first step. You got to have data to work with if you're going to analyze and use AI to create efficiencies in your process. Where do you typically see the most flagrant oversights in data collection and transfer inside of a typical operation?
So we work to standards, right? I never assume that something that I tell you is just take my word as gospel and trust me, because I've been doing this a long time. And so we follow standards like NIST, we follow ISO, we follow ISA and IEC, a lot of 3-letter agencies, 4-letter agencies that your viewers are going to be familiar with. Every one of those, they look at data predominantly in 2 states: data at rest and data in transit, right? So particularly, AI is a huge deal, right? Your AI models are only as good as the data that you train them on. Right. And that data sits somewhere. Maybe it's in the cloud, maybe it's on databases, file servers, whatnot in your environment. And if you have to protect that data, it needs to be, ideally it's encrypted where it's sitting at rest. You're restricting who has access to it, right? And that could be read as well as write. Like we said, your intellectual property, if it's in there, just somebody being able to view that data could be damaging to you. So don't just assume because nobody can write to it, it's not in trouble. So there's keywords and tricky phrases we talk about: identity and access management, IAM. Making sure that only the right people have access to that data, only the right people can write to that data. There's it's kind of the holy trinity in cybersecurity. We call it the CIA triad. In particular, when you're talking about data, we think of that. There's confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And confidentiality means making sure that only authorized people can view the data that or systems that you're talking about. Integrity is that only authorized people can modify the data or system that you're talking about. And availability is that the system or data is available when you need it, it's ready to you. In IT, that's the order of priority: confidentiality, integrity, availability. In OT, or in manufacturing, where we're mainly worried about making sure our processes stay up and running, we flip that a little bit. We say availability is king, then integrity, and then confidentiality is last. And if you think about that for a second, it kind of makes sense, right? If you think about an ATM, I think most of us would rather the ATM be unavailable rather than have just anybody be able to come in and look at our balance, or certainly take money out. Whereas on the other side, when we think about OT systems, a production machine or production line, we'd probably be okay with potential data leakage or a little less security if we can keep that line up and running. Doesn't mean we ignore the confidentiality and integrity. We just bump the availability up a little bit.
Right. So how do you strike that balance?
Wow. One of the biggest pieces of any cybersecurity program is a risk management program, right?
Okay.
I'm a big advocate of risk management. And at its core basic principle, risk is comprised of two components: impact and probability, right? Impact is if this situation happened, if the worst thing happened to us, what would that do to our business? That could be, especially in manufacturing environments, that could be a health or safety or environmental impact. Certainly could be a financial impact, right? And then the other thing we look at is, well, how likely is this to happen? And, if we're in Chicago or we're in Detroit, and we're looking at the likelihood of a hurricane, not very likely, but the likelihood of a blizzard, much more likely. So we use those two factors, impact and probability, to come up with a risk score. And that really needs to be your deciding factor for every organization. And every organization and every system is going to have a different risk score. And you use that to kind of guide your priorities, your prioritization, and your decision-making process around, okay, when have we gone too far in slacking off or allowing confidentiality or integrity to fall a little bit in the name of availability?
Right. Okay. So can you think of like a good story to kind of illustrate? Well, I guess first of all, when you engage a customer, typically because they had a problem occur, or because they're being proactive and they're trying to prevent problems from occurring?
It's more of the first, right?
Okay.
A lot of what we get engaged with is someone has done an assessment or an audit on them. That could
Okay.
be their insurance company, it could be somebody else in their supply chain, or it just simply asked for them to do this, right?
Yep.
And they did the assessment, or they looked and they said, wow, we really had no idea we needed to have this asset inventory system, or we needed to have, threat detection. We don't even know what that is. And we've certainly never considered it for our OT system. Why does our DCS system or our PLC need to be assessed for threats?
Okay.
And so they'll call us in and they'll say, hey, can you help us out here? And we'll do an assessment. We'll come in. We're happy to do an assessment and take a look at that. But to be honest with you, 99.9% of the what we call critical infrastructure systems, right? So DHS classifies about 17 or 16 different sectors of critical infrastructure, and most manufacturers fall under that category. They almost all have the same big three needs. Number one is an asset inventory. They don't really know what they've got in their manufacturing spaces. They don't know all the PLCs and HMIs and smart transmitters and things they have in the environment. Number two, they're lacking risk management that we talked about. They don't know how to quantify cyber risk, and especially cyber risk to their environment. And then the third big one is process and procedures. We all have this tribal knowledge. We all kind of know how to do the stuff we do. But the problem comes in, especially when you're in an emergency situation, or you're trying to train outside people, bring outside people. If it isn't written down, if it isn't documented, if you can't repeat it, I don't want to say it's worthless, but it's definitely of less value. And so what we found through repeated assessments is those three are always near the top of the list for our manufacturing and critical infrastructure standards.
I see. Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, definitely. So then how about the story of somebody that had a pretty major issue pop up and they reached out to you?
So we had I'm trying to think a couple of stories. So we actually had a customer who had ransomware. They had an event. They called us up and they said, "Hey, we really need you to take a look at this." We came in, we took a look at everything. One of the bigger ones, I think, that's more in line with what you guys are looking for. We had a major manufacturer. They produce emergency systems for Department of Defense, for hospitals, for these guys. And they said, "Hey, we'd like you to come in and just do an assessment for us." And we came in, and part of our assessment was actually doing it's a vulnerability scan. So it just looks at their systems, their computers, all of their controllers, and it looks against basically a known list of vulnerabilities that are published by government agencies, by private sector. And what we found was their emergency systems, their emergency power systems, were susceptible to what was called, actually it was Blue Keep. It was a vulnerability that the NSA actually developed and was on these operating systems that allowed a bad actor to completely take control of the system, 100%.
Oh, wow.
And these systems were deployed, like we said, they were deployed at military bases, they were deployed in hospitals, they were deployed in data centers. So this was a huge deal, right? They had to recall these systems, they had to emergency develop a patch for this and put it out. And unfortunately, to our knowledge, this was never exploited in the wild. So it was a big find. It really was. And then after that, they were like, "Yeah, we would really like you guys to stick around and do more work with us."